So this week, we'll be looking at manipulating ArcGIS Pro documents, including maps and layouts. Now, we're going to be using the ArcPy.mp that you see right there, the MP module, and that's the mapping module. So MP just means mapping. And the mapping module is designed to manipulate the context, or I shouldn't say the contents of existing project documents. So when you have an ArcGIS project, you can manipulate it with the mapping module. I'm just going to go over to ArcGIS Pro to remind you of the terminology and the things that we're talking about today. Here we have an open ArcGIS Pro document, an ArcGIS project. And what we can see here is that on the right-hand side, we have our contents pane. And then in the middle, I have a layout open called Q2. And that's the same as the layout in the catalog pane under layouts for the project. And then under maps, there's a map called first. And if I open up the map, that's where we usually do just mapping and analysis. But when we're ready to create a map, we create a layout for it, like so. So we have a layout, Q2, and a map called first. The map called first is, in fact, the map we see in the layout. So it's the map associated with what's called a map frame. And this thing I just selected is called a map frame. And this is the name of it is first map frame right here. Map frames contain the map called first from here in a way that's then printable and ready for a layout or for putting online or whatever you want to do with it. So the map frame contains a map called first, and then that contains layers. Layers have labels and they have symbology, like truck routes here being red or police stations being green. That's the symbology. In the layout, we also have other elements. So the map frame contains the map called first that you see over here. And then we have what are called map surround elements, such as the scale bar, the north arrow, and text. Each of these elements has a name. If I double click on Q2, for example, or right click and say properties, either way, I get a text element. And under general, for that element called Q2, that has I should say it's not called Q2, but has Q2 in it, it's just text. The name is just text here. So that's just a default name. Every element must be given a unique name. So text is here. If I go to the north arrow and I double click on that, its name is north arrow. And you could change that to whatever you want it to be as long as you know what it is. And then scale bar is called, double click on that, scale line. So these are the internal names on the map layout here for these map surround elements. And we need to know those names because to access these things via Python, we access them by type, whether it's a scale bar, north arrow, or other map surround element, and then by name, such as scale line refers to this scale bar here. No other scale bar would have the same name. Likewise, north arrow is called north arrow here, and that is this north arrow. If I add another north arrow, I'd have to give it a different name. And then the text box, again, is called just plain old text here. And that belongs to that text box. If I add another text box, well, it would be called something different. So the name of the map surround elements are given there. So that's the structure of an ArcGIS project, basically. And we can manipulate the layers and labeling and symbology of any of the layers. And we can manipulate any of the things that you see here on this layout, including the map frame will give us a map, and we generally access the map first via the map frame. So we get a map frame, and then we get the map from it to manipulate it. So we know that we're always manipulating the map that belongs to a particular map frame, like so. And this is called first map frame. It has a name as well. I could have multiple map frames in here. If I had an inlay or something, then I'd give a different name to the other map frame. But if we need to access or search or list map frames or anything like that, we can use a wildcard to find first map frame, for example, only, or find only, one of the elements that we're looking for. So when we talk about the mapping module, we're talking about those elements. And the idea is that with that, you can do all kinds of things. You can create a report on information contained in projects. Maybe you want to go through each of the layers and create a report, or have a quick printout of all the coordinate systems or extents or any broken data sources, etc. The other thing that the mapping module allows us to do is to repair data sources. So often you've all seen when you open a map and there's an exclamation mark beside it, or there's nothing showing for the layer, and that's because it can't find the path to the original data for the layer in the table of contents. And so you have to often point it to where the layer actually is before it will show up on the map. And you can do that programmatically by changing the path. And that's something the ArcPy mapping module allows. Finding and replacing things in all layouts, for example, repairing data sources, automating sharing of projects, creating basic data in batch. That means for multiple projects using map export commands. So maybe you have 100 different projects and you need to create a map from each one of them and output it. Well, it's much quicker to write a quick loop to go through and just export each of those to a PDF file of each of the layouts, rather than doing it manually, opening each project and going and doing it. So these are the things the mapping module allows us to do quickly. We can create map books. That's basically maps, submaps of a larger map. And we'll see an example of that at the end of the thing we're doing here. So again, there's more examples here. Updating map document metadata. So metadata is the descriptive information about layers or maps or anything that you create in ArcGIS Pro. And so metadata is available on many of the items that you can then update and change values of. Let's look at the way in which a ArcGIS project is organized within the ArcPy mapping module. So we have what is called an object hierarchy here, and it's about containment. So for example, here, the red box shows the ArcGIS project. So to get to any of the things like maps or layouts or map frames or layers or labels, etc., you must first get access to ArcGIS project. Then you can get access to maps by listing maps, or layouts by listing layouts. You could get maps and you can put a wildcard in there. A wildcard, just the asterisk there, a wildcard. And look for a map by name like first map, first, for example, which is the map we just saw in ArcGIS Pro called first. So if I just want that map by name, I can put the name first in the list maps method of the ArcGIS project variable. Or I can get a list of all maps and then go through each name until I find the one I want to get a particular map. Once I have a map, I could list layers to look, and then look at particular layers and get their labels and play with the labels. Or I could list tables if I want to do something with the tables, or bookmarks if I want to do something with bookmarks in a project. Likewise, we can go down here to list layouts. And from ArcGIS project, the method list layouts, and we can also list layouts by a specific name only if we want to. That's okay. And when we have a layout, we can get a map frame. That's what we see as the map frame, which contains a map this way. So from the map frame, we can get the specific map that belongs to the map frame that we're looking for, or that we have if we only have one map frame. And we get the map from that and then modify any layers or tables or bookmarks that we have in there. We can also, with a layout, get the elements. So we can get map list elements to get map frame elements. We can get graphic elements, legend elements, map surround elements, like the ones I showed you, picture elements, and text elements. So we can list any of those to get them to modify their values. And we can also go through the layout to export to an external file, like a PDF document, for example. So we can export from the PDF document into or from a layout. We can also export maps using the same functions as well. So the ArcGIS project object has a number of properties and methods, some of which are specific to the way you would want a tool to work. So things like active map and active view would return whatever is selected in the table of contents or that is showing at the time in ArcGIS Pro. So if you have a particular script that would use those, we're not going to use any of these active ones here at all. We'll always get layouts and stuff by name or just by the fact that there's only one in the document or something like that. And active map and active view only work inside of when you have a script running inside of ArcGIS, like in the ArcGIS Pro Python window or notebook. And these are read-only properties. So red ones are, I just listed them here as read-only. And then we have properties that are read-write, like default geodatabase, toolbox. We have more read-only ones, like the file path of the current document, the version of the current document. We have a home folder and metadata. Metadata returns a metadata class, which then we could add metadata or change metadata about our map document or ArcGIS project document. Then we have a bunch of methods like this. So for example, listing broken data sources. We could list which broken data sources, go through them and fix them if we wanted to programmatically. We can import documents from previous versions of ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Desktop. We can list layouts, maps, reports, and importantly here, we can save or save a copy. If we have a map, or I should say ArcGIS project document variable, we can use the save method to save it after we've made modifications to things up here, to the properties of it, for example. We have update connection properties. If we want to change paths from old data to new data, for example, for a bunch of layers, we can update them all with that method. So let's look at an example here of how do we get a ArcGIS project reference. The first example here is inside of ArcGIS Pro. And I'll do most of my examples here inside of ArcGIS Pro so that you can see how they work immediately on the map or layout. So the first thing we do is we import ArcPy as normal, and then we import all of the mapping functionality right here. To get a reference and have an ArcGIS project variable, we just simply say ArcGIS project, and then we use this thing in parentheses called current. That's called a keyword. The keyword current means the currently open project within ArcGIS Pro. And if you use this means, this way to get a reference to an ArcGIS project using the current keyword, you must be running your code inside of ArcGIS Pro. So that all has to happen inside of ArcGIS Pro in order for that to work properly. You cannot use the current keyword outside of ArcGIS. If you want to work with map documents outside of ArcGIS Pro, then all you have to do is change from current to the actual path to the document. Outside of ArcGIS Pro, all you have to do to utilize a project is to change current to a path to an APRX file. And generally, that's how you would be using this if you were doing a lot of batch processing of project files, for example. You would want to do it that way. Once you have this, just like the previous slide, then you can run code on the APRX file. After you've modified things, if you want to, you can save it to commit all the changes that you've made. So for example, here, I'll go back into, I'm going to go over here to PyScripter. And here I'm going to import ArcPy. So I'll say import ArcPy. And they'll say from arcpy.mp import all the functionality there. Then I'll get a reference to the project. And I'm going to, as I said, I'll be demonstrating these things inside of ArcGIS Pro. So I'm going to use the current keyword to get the reference for the ArcGIS project. So I'll just call this curdoc, and that'll be equal to ArcGIS project. And then in the parentheses, I'll just put the keyword current, like so. So that will only work inside of ArcGIS. If I ran that here, I'll just show you an example. So I get this error called self arc object, arc scripting mapping, ArcGIS project, etc., OS error current. And I just wanted to show you that so that you know if you see that error and it says at the bottom OS error current, it means you're trying to access a map document outside of ArcGIS Pro using the current keyword, which you're not allowed to do. However, if I put in a path to a document, let's say this one, I'll just show the example here. Copy that. Go back over here, and I'll just put that in here, R Q2, and then Q2.aprx like that. I'll delete the current. If I run it now with this, that's okay. It'll just run, and I'll have a reference to the ArcGIS project that is saved in the APRX file without even opening it in ArcGIS Pro. But generally, the way you create a script or a tool that will do stuff to a map and a layout is you start with the current, and you use current as I had before in here, just put current back. And you do all the things that you need to do to create a script that's working by copying and pasting into ArcGIS Pro your code and seeing how it works. If there's errors, fixing it until you got code that's working the way you want it to for a project. Then you can switch it to the path to that same project and do it outside of ArcGIS Pro without Pro open at all. So now, for example, I could look at I'll just say print curdoc.metadata. Remember, that's a property, title, for example, the title of the document. So I'll just copy and go control copy. I'll go over to ArcGIS Pro. Then I'll click on analysis right here. I'll open up just the Python window so you can see things right away. This isn't going to modify anything that we see here. It's just going to print out the title of the current document. And it has none, so there's no title. So if I go back, we could add a title in the metadata simply by saying curdoc.metadata.title equals my map, for example. And then if I go back here and I run that, and then I run or print the title like so, it will be there, my map. So that's all available there. So I'm just using the current document to do these things. And if I wanted to, at this point, I could save it. I could say curdoc.save like so, just as easy as that. And that will save it and commit that metadata title to the project. So accessing the current project allows you to work with its properties and methods. And there's very few of them to work with on just the document itself. The document is mainly a stepping stone to get to other things. So in summary, using the current keyword allows you to access a open map document. So it has to be open, and you must run your code within ArcGIS Pro, either in the notebook or the Python console, or through a tool that you create in ArcGIS Pro. And you can't use that word outside of ArcGIS Pro if you want to access one or more of the projects that exist on a disk, for example. And the save and save a copy method are available once you do modify a map document or any of its constituent parts, such as layouts, layers, or maps, so that you can either commit the changes or you can create a new copy without modifying the original, which is always useful. Some other properties, basic properties of ArcGIS projects, you can try these on your own because they're not overly exciting in any way, is things like the file path. If you want to get a reference to the file path of the current document, get when the date saved is, or change more metadata. And in very rare circumstances, getting the active view. That's useful if you have a particular tool that runs on, say, just maps, for example. It doesn't do anything with layouts, but it just does something to a map, like automatically adding layers or doing something with a layer that you get and then doing analysis with its geometry, etc. Getting the active view gives you the current map or current layout that you can then use in code. But we won't use that at all because it's not a good way to go about doing things generally. It's kind of for specific circumstances. The other thing you can try, and I won't do this example either because it's very straightforward, is changing paths to new things. Like look at the scenario here, for example. So your company is moving from ArcGIS Desktop to ArcGIS Pro. And that means that, you have to have all your MXD documents. So the .mxd, which is a document type for ArcGIS Desktop. It's the equivalent of a project in ArcGIS Pro. And so you want to move those over. And at the same time, you may have been working with, let's say, shape files. And now all the shape files have been migrated into a geodatabase. And you don't want to go into each single layer in your map to all the map documents and update the data sources to the new ones. So that's obviously a very painful process, tedious, and that's exactly the type of thing that the mapping module is meant to address, one of its main advantages. So you might have had all your old shape files in here, but now there are feature classes in here. And you don't want to go and change the feature class names because they're the same, but you just want to change where the data comes from, the workspace, so to speak. And so you can search through an entire project using the current APRX file reference, the ArcGIS project reference, curdoc, right here. And then saying update connection properties and putting the old workspace and then the new workspace. And it will go through and automatically update everything to the new workspace for all the feature classes, rasters, etc., that are in your project. So it's quite handy that way. And then, of course, you can save or save as or save a copy, I should say, save or save a copy to commit those changes so that when anybody goes and opens that project, they'll automatically have updated connections and they won't have missing data sources. So the map object becomes more important. There's more things we can do with a map object. And the map object has properties and methods. And the way in which we get the map object matters a lot. So 90% of the time, you're working with the mapping module in order to do things with standardizing layouts, for example, in a number of different map documents. So you could have, let's say, 20 different map documents. I should say ArcGIS projects, map documents. The name is the ArcGIS project. APRX files is what I'm talking about here. So you might have 20 of those different ones, and they may have a bunch of layers in them. And you want to standardize certain layers. So that means like removing some layers or adding other ones. And the best way to do that, depending on how, if you have a layout also in there, is to always get a reference to the current map that you want to work with through either listing the maps and then working with a map directly. So that's the map object directly, because you could have many maps in a project, obviously. So you could ask for them and you put the name in there, or a wildcard character, partially match as well. And then you can get maps. It gives a list of maps. And of course you could say, okay, well, I want 0, or I want 1, or I want 2. You could also do it that way. Or you get the layout that you want to work with, which is, again, 90% of the time you're working with layouts. Then you list the elements of the layout, get the map frames. So here I'm listing all the map frames, MF here. And then I say my map just equals MF. And in this case here, because I only have one map frame on my map, I put 0. And I use the .map property to get the reference to the map that belongs to that layout. That's a safer way to go about it, because you want to usually modify maps that belong to the layout that you're working with in the mapping module to prepare for, let's say, creating a bunch of maps or submaps for subregions. Most of the time, we're going to use this method. Instead of getting maps directly, we'll get the maps, if we need to work with them, from the layout or from the layout's map frame. And this is what it looks like just in terms of the general workflow. So the general workflow we'll follow, and that's best to follow, is this: get the project, list layouts to get the layout, then list elements, looking for map frame elements. If there are more than one, you can put a wildcard in there to get, here the wildcard can go in, which is just a particular name of a map element. Or if you just have one map frame, like we are in this example, you can just say, okay, well, subscript it to 0. So just get the first item in the list, which would be the only item in the list if there's only one map frame. Then from the map frame, use the .map property to get the map that you then want to modify layers, tables, and bookmarks. So that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. It seems like a convoluted number of steps, or a convoluted way to get the map, but it's better than list maps, because list maps don't allow you to then work with the layout. And if you list maps, it might be a map. You might have multiple maps, and then you have to figure out which one belongs to the layout that you're working with or that you want to work with. So getting it from the layout is generally a better idea. So here's example, the first example. So we start with our imports, of course. We get our current map document, since the example here is to be used within ArcGIS Pro. Then we use the list maps. So this document or project .list maps method. And that gives a list of map objects. And here, for example, see how many there are. This might be something interesting. We only have one, but we can say for map in map list right here, print map.name. If we have multiple maps, for example, it'll print all the names out. Or alternatively, we just want to get the first map. Maybe we only have a project, all our projects only have one map and one layout. Well, in that case, you could go either way. You can go this way to work with the map and go to the layout to work with the layout, and not bother with the map frame, so to speak. But here, in this example, we list our maps, and then we get the first one from that list, and that's now a map object right here. And we can, for example, print the name. Back here in our Python, in a PyScripter that I'm using here, we'll start up here with our map. So I'll just remove what was there so far. So we got our current, our cur doc, so to speak, and then we'll make a list of maps, basically. Just call it map list equals curdoc.list maps. And that's a method, so we have to have those parentheses, even though we don't have a wildcard in here. If we were looking for a map by a particular name, we'd put the name here, like so. And that would then return a list with just that one map. We'll just get all maps here for as an example. Then I can go over that list and print things out, like the name of each map. So I could say for map obj in map list, print map obj dot name. And I can bring that over here and I'll run it in ArcGIS Pro. So there we go, and it prints out first. Because if you recall, in the catalog view here, we only have one map. So when it lists maps, it has a list with one thing in it. And that thing's name is first. We can save that map object. So that was just an example of listing them as an example. But generally you want to save it in my map equals map list here. And since we only have one thing in the map list, I'll just take that one thing. And I'll just print my map dot name like so. That'll do the same thing. So again, the map list is a list of map objects. And so we have to subscript that or slice it to get the item inside that list. And we want the first item, which is at index 0. And that represents a map object. So selecting all this, copy, over here and paste, and we'll say the same thing. We'll just print it first, like so. The second method, of course, is to get that map reference here, my map, from the layout. So we have to list layouts instead. So I'll say here, I'm going to remove that to show the second method and the preferred method of getting a reference to the map from the layout. So I'll say my layout equals curdoc.list layouts. Like so, and I'm just going to take the first thing in that list. Since our current project file only has a single map and single layout. So now that I have my layout, I can list elements such as the map frame, for example. So I'll say mf map frame equals my layout dot list elements. And then in here, I want a specific element, which is a keyword map frame element. And you can just go to the help file, look at list elements on the layouts, and it will show you all the different keywords you can put in here for different elements. I want the map frame elements, and I only have one map frame, so I'm going to get 0 there and store it in MF. Now I can say my map equals mf.property_map. And that gives my map. And now I could print, for example, my map.name. Like so. So from the map frame, we have the property.map. And then once we have a map, well, map has a property called name that we can print out. So if I just copy that and I do it over here, we'll get the same result saying first. Oops. I spelled something wrong. Map frame elements. What did I put in? Map frame. I think I spelled it right. It says invalid value for element type. Choices are map frame element. Oh, element. So, yes, not elements. Like so. So just by examining that error, I was able to deduce that, well, it's saying here, element type map elements is not correct. The choices are map element, graphic element, map surround element, legend element, picture element, text element. I want map frame element, not elements. So after that quick fix, control copy, back over here, and it will say first. There we go. So that's the second method of using the .map property to get reference from the map frame to the current map. And that's just shown here. So compared to the previous one, we have to first list layouts, and I can get just the one element. If you're Obviously, this is because this particular project only has one layout. If you have more than one layout, then use the layout name that you're looking for in the parentheses here as the wildcard, so that your layout list only has the one that you're concerned with getting the map for. Then I use the layout list elements method, and I look for map frame element. And that gives me then MF, which is a list of map frame elements. And in this example, a little bit different from what I just did. Obviously, here I put the slice 0 right at the end, which is fine. And in this example on the slide, I put my map equals map frame list 0, which is the first element dot map. The first element is a map frame, so the dot map property, and then I can print out the map name. So other map properties are things like, well, we've seen name. We could also change the name. It's a read write. So these are the properties of a map right here. So default camera, default view, map type, map units, metadata, name, reference scale, and spatial reference. So you're not going to use most of these most of the time. They're not. There's not a lot of properties to a map. So the map is just there as a kind of a means to get other things that are within the map. So we can look at the maps metadata. So that's the maps metadata, and that's different from the CurDoc or our ArcGIS project metadata. So they both have metadata available that you can then modify, like so. The reference scale is the scale at which the map draws. So this has nothing to do with the scale at which you're viewing the map. It's about the scale at which the map will draw or not draw. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you'll want to set those because you don't want, let's say, a whole bunch of noise at a particular scale, but it's not that useful as a property here for us. And of course, once you make changes, you can always save or save a copy. Let's just go back to the methods here, the map methods. So there's not a lot of properties for maps, but there are a lot of methods. And that's where most of the work to the map or using the map comes from. So things such as adding a base map. If you add a base map, what happens is if there's an existing base map, that base map is replaced with a new base map. You can add data from a path. You can add a layer to a group, add a table, clear selected features. So that's very important. So if you do any selections, or often before doing something with a geoprocessing tool, you can use the map method to clear any selected features that the user might have inadvertently left there that are not supposed to be selected for your particular script or tool, for example. You can export the map. This is a format you don't need to worry about. It has to do with another system. Insert layers, and you'll see how to do that in the exercise itself for this week. List bookmarks. You can also list broken data sources at this point in the particular map. You can list the layers, tables. You can move layers as well, which you'll also see in the examples. You can move layers, remove tables, set definitions, and update connection properties as well at the map level. So a lot of different methods here that are available to be used. So for example, clearing selected features. mymap.clearSelection. Listing broken data sources. mymap.list broken data sources. So once you have that map, you can use all these methods. mymap, add base map, OpenStreetMap. CurDoc.save, for example, once you make those changes. So I always put that there, but you don't always have to use that. I'm not going to use it in the current case because I'm just illustrating things. But remember, if you don't call that, then your map will not save with anything once the script is finished. So for example, if I go back here, just since I have a map variable now, let's say I had a few features selected on my map. So I'll go over here to first, and I'll select a bunch of things. I'll just select these. So there I got a bunch of things selected. Well, let's say I want to clear that selection. Well, I'll just say mymap.clear selection, clear selection, like so, and it's gone. So you can see how useful that would be in code if you have a script or tool that you're building that needs to work with all features and not just selected features. Remember, by default, things will only work with selected features if you have selected features. Let's say we want to add a base map. So I'll say mymap.add base map. And the base maps that I can add are any of the ones named here. So let's say I want streets. Well, then here, add base map, I type streets, like so. And we'll see it added here to our base, to our map. And so the base map is completed. And you can see it there behind everything. Once we have the map that belongs to the layout, we can list layers. So we use the list layers method of the map to get particular layers. And if we're looking for just a specific layer by name, we can put that name in as the wildcard string right there to only return a map layer by name, which is quite handy sometimes. So here, for example, we have all the same code as before to get a map from the layout's map frame. And then we use the list layers function, and then we could iterate over that, printing all the layer names. So once we're here, it's quite quick to do that. So we have our map and we can list layers. So I'll say layer list equals my map dot list layers, like so. And let's say for LYR or layer in LYR list. Oops. Oop, no, I don't want that there. Enter. Print layer dot name as an example. So if I run that over here, control paste and enter, and it prints out all of the layer names from the layer list, which contains objects, layer objects themselves. Now, another important thing to remember, if you do modify the order of layers, every time you change the order, you should get a new list of layers if you're using layer lists in any way subsequent to reordering them. Because if you don't, if I were to programmatically move layers around right now and then try to still use the same layer list, the order wouldn't match anymore between the layer list that was got up here and then the layer list that would be after moving layers around. So for example, if I was to remove farm pathway to the top now, my layer list doesn't change. So if I just say for layer in LYR list, print LYR name here, just doing it in the console itself, just to give this illustration. Print layer.name. There we go. Like so. So it gives truck routes, neighborhoods, police stations, and farm pathways still down here. And that's because I didn't get a new layer list. I'm still working with the old layer list and I manually moved a layer around. So I'd have to get the new layer list again. And then I could print them and it would show the correct order that we see. Farm pathway at the top now. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Layer objects have a number of properties and methods, so way more than does the ArcGIS project itself or the map itself. So you can see here the brightness of a layer. We can modify the way it looks, the contrast, whether it's visible or not visible, for example. We could have the data source, and these are read-only, the ones in red, connection properties, read-only. Is it a feature layer, for example? So a vector layer, or is it a raster layer? You can check that on the layer properties. The symbology is also manipulable there. Transparency, another way it looks. Max threshold and min threshold for visibility. You can modify. The name itself can also be modified. For example, if I'll do this just in the console of modifying a name, for example, I'll say, okay, for layer and layer list, I'll get the first layer, farm pathway. So I'll say X or farm path equals LYR list, since it's the first thing in there now, 0. So farm path dot name is the existing name. If I want to change that, equals a new string, farm, like so. And notice it changed it immediately right here in the table of contents. That doesn't modify the underlying data source. It just changes the name that we see here. And that's also the name we would need to use if we were looking for that layer by name, for example, at this point. And I'll change it back to farm pathway, just so none of the other examples are mixed up or anything like that. So I'll just copy and paste that there, and then just have a look and watch the table of contents as I hit the enter key. Changes it right back to farm pathway. So this is an example of using that name property, which is a read-write property. And then we have a number of methods, of course, here. So we can save a layer to a layer file. So if we like the layer and we want to, let's say, put that same layer in a number of other projects, we can save a copy, and that saves a layer file. The layer file itself has no data in it. It just references the data source by path and the way it looked, the way it's symbolized, had transparency, everything like that. So you could modify a layer object if you have a layer file on a disk by itself, and then change its visibility, etc. And that would automatically then update that layer in any of the projects that use the layer. We also have things like get selection set, which we'll see is important. List label classes, important. If we want to do anything with labels, you'll see that in the exercise. List layers, because remember, a layer itself could be a group layer, and there's different types of layers. Most of the time, a layer is just a plain single theme, but you could have multiple ones in there. Set selection set. Supports being important. So does a layer support certain things like labels, for example? We can change layer transparency and whether it shows labels or not. Transparency, visibility, pretty straightforward. So for example, here, I won't do the whole example on the slide there. You can go through that, but I'll just show with this layer for farm path, for example. And the farm path, we have to zoom in to really see it here. So I'll just zoom in a bit. There's the farm pathway. So nothing too exciting there. It's just a feature, and you've worked with it in the previous labs. So I could say farm path dot visible equals false, and that will turn it off. See, or true to turn it on, like so. I can change the transparency. I could say farm path transparency, or farm path, sorry, dot transparency equals 50. So 50% transparent or opaque. And see, it just kind of changes the color a bit, doesn't it? Because we're not seeing anything behind it. 0 means fully opaque, and 100 means fully transparent, like so. So those are properties that are easily modified. In this example here, I'm listing the layers. So everything else up here is the same as before. Same. Just repeating so that you get used to seeing what has to go there when you do these examples to get down to the map and the layers. So here listing layers, and I might say a target layer. Okay, well, I want to loop over the layer list, look for the layer name that equals target layer here, neighborhoods. And when I find that one, then modify the label, show labels equals true, and set the transparency. And here, just printing the data source to see where that layer is coming from. So in this case here, I'm just getting the full layer list without, I could put the wildcard in there to get just the neighborhoods. So I could do this, for example. I could say neighborhoods equals my map dot list layers. And then in here, I just want neighborhoods. Like so. But I'll actually do it here. I'll put a slice on at 0. So I actually get just the neighborhood layer itself. So then I could say NBR hoods. I should turn them on first, so you can see them. NBR hoods, and then I can modify the properties like dot transparency equals 50, for example, like so. That reduces the background and makes obviously more prominent the labels, as in this example here. And anything underneath it, like major routes and stuff, will show through. Whereas if the transparency is at 0, you don't see anything underneath. So that's another good example. Just a different one that I showed you is getting the map layer neighborhoods using the wildcard for list layers, and then working with it directly rather than looping over all layers, finding it, and then changing things. Next is a selection set. So we can use the select tool. We can also use the select by attributes tool in our toolbox to select features. Or we can use the layer property called set selection set. And we send that IDs. So 0 is the first record, 1 is the second record or object in the table, 3, 4, 5, etc. is the fifth layer. So here, for example, I'm saying I want to select feature 2, 41, and 6, because we start at base 0. And I want that to be a new selection. There's different types of selections. There's new, there's select from current, etc. And that's done on the layer object itself. So on my neighborhoods layer that I have in this example. So again, all this is the same, all the same stuff here as previous, same. What's different here is I'm listing layers like I just showed you with a wildcard just to get neighborhoods, and then I'm setting the selection set on there. So going back here, for example, I can say neighborhoods dot set selection set, and then I have to put in a list of object identifiers and then a method. And the different methods here are new, union, symmetric difference, intersect difference. I'm going to make a new selection, and I'll put some 1, 6, and 3 just as an example in there, and you'll see it actually real time being selected. As you can see there, there's the selection set as such. And from the map frame, we can then use once we have a selection, we can say zoom to all layers, and that zooms to all the selected features on all layers. And that's from the map frame, not the layer this time. So now I would go MF, which we have the map frame already, dot zoom to all layers, and that will zoom us to just those selected things in real time, that we see here. But because it's the map frame, we'll only see that on the layout. So go over to the layout, and there we go. Now we've zoomed to all the selected features. So notice how nothing happened on the map itself, zoom to selected features. It happens on the layout because zoom to all layers is only available on a map frame. It's not available on the map or on a map itself. And again, this is an example of why I said that the mapping module is mainly geared towards working with layouts. We also have definition queries, another thing that layers support. So again, all this stuff is the same as we just saw, same. And again, I have it on, a lot of repeating in here so that you get to know that process and that you can practice it many times. But basically in a definition query, because it's a type of query, we want to add field delimiters to the name. And what is a definition query first, maybe, because you probably don't even know what that is or don't remember. So let's go over here and I'll show you what a definition query is. First, I'm just going to close up the Python window to start with. And once that's closed, I'm going to say, okay, let's make a definition query such that all the neighborhoods will be shown except for Bell's Corners East right here. First thing I'm going to do is go back to my map here and just unselect everything. Or let's do it in the right here in our Python window, because that's what we're learning about. So I can say NBR hoods dot clear, or I should say my map dot clear selection. There we go. So it clears all the selections for us. So we want to do a definition query. A definition query specifies what features in a layer are shown or not shown. So I go to neighborhoods and I double click to go to the, or I should say, shouldn't say here, double click to go to the layer properties, and then you'll see an item called definition query. Here I'll add a new query. So I click on that little button. And I'm going to say where names is equal to Bell's Corners East, like so. And I'll click apply. And okay. So now, when I said Bell equals Bell's Corners East, now I have a map that shows only Bell's Corners East. But I want a map that shows everything but Bell's Corners East. So I want Bell's Corners East to be a hole in the map. So I'll edit my thing. I'll say not equal to is not equal to. I'll click apply and okay. And now we'll have everything, every feature in the neighborhood shown except for Bell's Corners East. So that's called a definition query. And I'm just going to remove that for now. I'll click OK, and everything will be back to normal. Like so. So that's a definition query. So in adding a definition query in code, we start with adding field delimiters. We specify the feature class. And then the field name that we're interested in using in the definition query, in this case, names. Then we check if this layer supports a definition query. If it does, then we set the definition query. For example, here, I'm using my string format statements to do that. I'm just going to remove some of that visual noise. So I have squiggly brace not equal to, and notice this is not the same as the SQL, not equal to. Or I should say the not equal to that we have to use in Python, not SQL, but in Python. In Python, we have to use that, not equal to. This is another type of not equals to for queries. So I say squiggly brace not equal to, for example, here, neighborhood called Iris. So just one of the neighborhoods. And then I have my dot format with the FLD from here with the properly delimited field being put into the squiggly braces here. So again, everything up here is the same. So going back, And I'll just do this just in the console again as an example, just to show how that works. But I'm gonna type it up actually in here. So we have our layer list, our map, and then we have to get from the list layers. We don't want a layer list, we just want neighborhoods. So I'll just put this as br hoods equals list layers, and then for the wildcard neighborhoods, like so. So now I have neighborhoods, and I'll say, okay, I don't know how that got in there. There we go. Neighborhoods equals my map list layers, like so. Then I'll specify the name of the feature class. Actually, I'll just put here, I'll just call it FC, and I'll say that equals neighborhoods, because I have to use this in two places. So I'll do that instead and say FC here, list layers, just the feature class that I'm interested in. Then I'll say add delimiters. So I'll say FLD equals ArcPy dot add field delimiters. And then FC feature class, and then the names column or attribute. And then I'll say, okay, if my layer neighborhoods, so we called it neighborhoods, not my layer here in this example, dot supports, and then in here, definition query, all in caps, like so, definition query. Then go ahead and we'll set that definition query. So then I'll say, okay, NBR hoods dot definition query, like so, equals, and then I'll have quotes, and I'll have a dot format statement. And I know in there I'm going to have to put my feature class, or no, I should say my FLD, my field. And then the query will be squiggly brace, which is the field properly delimited, does not equal, and then iris, like so, one of the neighborhoods. So now if I just take that and run it, I'll just copy and paste it. I'm just doing the whole thing again, like so. It says ArcPy is not defined, so I must have spelled something wrong. Where did I put ArcPy? Yeah, I forgot the C here. ArcPy, there we go. And we'll just try that again. ArcPy has no attribute, has no add field delimiters. Maybe I spelled it wrong. Not good. Delimiters. Yes, because that's what we're doing. We're delimiting, not delimitering. So we got to be careful about the spelling of these things. So we'll just run that now, and this should work fine at this point. Oh, list object has no attribute support. So I got a list object. Yes, neighborhoods. I asked for it. Remember, it returns a list, and I wasn't paying attention here. So when I say my map.list layers, it returns a list. And lists have no, or have list properties and methods, but I want the object in the list, which is the feature class that I'm asking for. So I have to put that there. And now it should work properly. There we go. Now, if I just zoom out, I'm not sure where Iris was. Well, there's Iris right there. I'm going to just try just this last line here without the supports. There. I don't know why the supports is returning false. So I say neighborhood dot supports equals definition query. Let's just test that. I think it should say true now, yeah. But when there's no definition query there, so if I remove that one that I just added by a code, like so, it will redraw. And I think there, see, that says false, which is very strange, obviously. It's very strange that we'd be giving false. There must be some bug. So I just put that there and we'll try it again. Like so, removing the supports. And there we go. See, iris is now transparent. So with the add field delimiters, when there was no definition query already on the layer, then what happened is the supports returned false. And then this was never run, this line here. So we just got rid of that. This works fine if you're not using current and you're using the path instead. That'll work. But in this case, it doesn't work for some reason, and it's probably a bug. I'll have to look at that. So that definition query allows us to then turn on or off certain features of a layer. For working with other elements, such as text elements on the layout, we have to use the list elements method of the layout. And here, for example, I'm just listing all the elements, and then I'm going through and printing the name and type of each one. So we have the list elements up here, map frame element, but I may want to just list all elements on the layout and then have flow control to work with them, for example. And when I'm just working with a layout, I don't need that. So I'll also call this my layout now, like so. So I list the elements, and then I can say, I can loop over those. I can say for LM in my layout, or I should call that my elements, not my layout, obviously. Sorry about that. My elements, that's much better. In my elements, I'll say print lm dot name lm dot type. And I'll just run that. And it says, okay, on my layout right now, I have a thing called scale line, which I showed you earlier. Remember when I was showing you the elements, the surround elements? That's a map surround element, the scale line. So that's the scale right here. Text element called text. That's right up here. That's the title. And it's called text element. North arrow. That's the name of the north arrow. And it's a map surround element. So we have two map surround elements, a scale line and a north arrow. And then I have first map frame, which is the map frame element that contains the map itself. So I'm able to list all those elements. And depending on the element type that I want, I may only want to work with, let's say, text elements. So I can say list elements, text elements, for example. So going back here, if I just want to work with certain elements, so I'll say list elements, text element. Like so. And then I can run that. And we'll only have one thing in the list, which will be the thing called text when it prints it out. Text is the name of the text element right there. So if I want that element just as text, let's say to change it, well, I can do so. So instead of looping through, that was just to show how we can loop through all elements and check their types, because that could be important in an if statement. So you can say, if this is type that, then do this. But here, for example, I won't have my element. I'll call that the title. LM will be the text element 0. There's only one text element on there. Then I can change the title. I can say title dot lm dot text equals something like this. I'll just say equals a new string, like so. Then I'll run that. And you see immediately it changed from whatever it was, Q2, to Ottawa map right there in real time. And again, that's why I'm using the current keyword, so you can see these things and how they work in real time. It really helps you to figure out what's going on in your code before you would commit it to working with the non-current keyword and the path instead in a standalone script. So text elements can also, we can change position of a text element or any of the elements. So element position X and Y, and these are in page units. That means you must know what size your page is in order to properly work with those. You can also rotate elements by sending an angle. You can change the name or get the name of the change or get the name of a text element or a text element. You can change the text, the angle of the text, the size, the visibility of the text. You can even clone text and delete here, for example. So you have quite a bit of options with text elements that you can work with. Most of the time, you're working with the position of the element and potentially the actual text that is part of the text element. So here again, for example, I'm saying list all the elements, text elements. So I get a list of text elements. And then I'm looking for an element called title text. Now, I don't have one of those right now. So I'd have to change my element over here. If I go back to ArcGIS Pro, I'd have to change the name of this element to title text under general if I want to work with it by name or by that name anyway. So here I could say title text like so. That's all you got to do. Just changes the name of it. And that corresponds then with what we see here, title text. And then I give the new text and I can put the in whatever position I want. Here, this is 1 inch X. So whatever its Y position is, will stay the same, but it will put it at 1 inch in on the page. So just going back here, I'll do that example without the loop and everything. So I'll just say title element. First, I have to get the text element again, because now it has a different name. So where did I get that there? There we go. So I'll say title lm dot element position X. I'll just say that equals to 1 inch. And it's in inches, by the way. See, it moves it over there to the right of the map, 1 inch in from the side. Or puts the center of it, I should say. So the actual center of it is 1 inch in from the side. So right there, you can see the page units, 0 to 1, that's 1 inch. That's right at the center of the text. So it moves it the center of the text over. That's its anchor point. In the properties dialog here, and we can also change the elements anchor points. You see right now, the anchor point that is set is the middle. We can't change that by code. So it has to be changed here. Let's say I want it to be the left-hand side, I'll change it there. Just like that. And now if I change it, the value X element position 1, it's going to move Ottawa map to the right. Like so, see? Because the anchor point is the leftmost edge of the text itself. We can also export our particular layout to a PDF file or even just an image file. There's all kinds of export functions. Just check the help file under layout and you'll see all of the export functions there. So here, for example, if I'm satisfied with my layout, I have a path here, the name of the PDF I want to create, and then I just send that to the export to PDF function or method of the layout. So going back here, for example, just to demonstrate that here, let's say I'm happy with my map right now and I want to export it as a static PDF. Well, I'd say, okay, my layout, layout dot export, and notice all the export functions here. I could export it to any of these formats. So common ones like JPEG, PNG, SVG, TIFF, etc. So I'll just choose a PDF here, export to PDF. Right there we go, right there, and I'll give it a path. Also, say, in this case, I'll just say C temp, and I'll just call it a map.pdf, like so, and that's it. That then exports it, and I'll open it up in a second. So if it's successful, it just returns the path to that particular PDF file. So if I go over to my temp folder on my C drive, there's a map.pdf, and if I open it up, there it is. Exported as a PDF that's shareable, or you can put it wherever you want. Export functions are really straightforward from the layout. A couple map frame methods. So we didn't look a lot at map frame methods other than the property.map so far. So map frame method, there's a couple of useful map frame methods, such as pan to extent. So again, here in this case, I have some reference strings, such as a field, shape field, and a feature class called neighborhoods. So the idea here is I want to have the map pan, so the scale doesn't change, it just moves its center over to the first geometry in neighborhoods, FC, right here. So I get the geometry with the shape field, and I use the next method of Python 3 on the search cursor, and I get the first element that's returned, which will be a geometry called poly, because it's a polygon layer. So poly is a geometry here. Then I get my layout, and I store it in my layout. So we've already seen that. That's good, check. Then I get the map frame. So I get my map frame here by listing elements, map frame element, and I get the first one since we only have one map frame. Once I have that, I can say map frame, pan to extent, and poly.extent. Remember, all geometries have a .extent property, which returns an extent object. And so we can pan to that extent whenever we have an extent object. For example, here, going back here, so I have my layout already there. So I will list the map frame element. So I'll say, okay, I already have MF, in fact, don't I? First map frame. So I don't even have to bother with that. I don't have to relist that. I've already done it. And it's called first map frame. So what I need to do is then get a geometry to zoom to. So I'll say, okay, my poly equals next search cursor, or I didn't import that. So I'll just say ArcPy.da.search cursor, since I didn't import those things, search cursor. And the feature class will be FC still, neighborhoods. And then I'll put here just in a list instead of a variable, like on the slides, just for brevity. I'll say, okay, I want the shape at field to give me the geometry, because geometries have the extent property. And then after here, I just want the first thing, which will be a polygon. So poly, if I just check it, it says polygon object. Great. I don't know which one it is, but I'll say now, I'll say, okay, map frame dot pan to extent, and I'll say poly dot extent, like so, from geometry. And see how it moved the map? Must be Barhaven, which is right in the center here with the first one. So that's called a pan to extent. And that can be useful if you're let's say doing certain quadrats, for example, of a map, and you want to print out or create a separate map for each quadrat. You divided your region into quadrats, square regions, and you get each square pan to the extent, print the map, pan to the next extent of the next geometry, print the map, etc. So you could do it that way. That's one usage of pan to extent that's useful. We also have the zoom to all layers, which you've already seen. That requires a selection set. So for example, in this example, instead of using the method to set the selection set, I'm using select by attributes, select layer by attribute. That's a function in ArcPy.management. So that's a toolbox function to make a selection, object ID equals 10, for example. Of course, this is a much slower way than the previous way that I showed you. But it's also a possible way you can use as well. It's just slower to use select by attribute than it is to use the select by set selection set with object IDs, since we're just interested in object IDs here. This is more if you're interested in other attributes than object IDs, you know, that you want to base selections on. You might have a list of values, names or whatever, and you want to set selection sets for each one sequentially or something. You could use this way. So that selects the object. Then we have the same thing. We have a layout. We get our layout. Then we get our map frame. And from the map frame, zoom to all layers, zooms to the selected features up here. So that whatever is selected up there. This is one you can try on your own because it's, you know, the same thing we've already seen, the zoom to all layers method. You can try that one as well. So let's look at an actual workflow example. Let's say we want to create a series of maps where each map shows a particular neighborhood, and it looks like this, so that the neighborhood itself that we're interested in mapping on each map is see-through. So we just see the road networks or the streets beneath that neighborhood. And we see the neighborhood outline, obviously. And then all other things out here are just white and transparent, semi-transparent. And we have the name up here for that neighborhood. And then down here in the corner, we have a north arrow and a scale bar. So the trick to doing this is that we have a base layer of streets. We have the polygon layer of neighborhoods. We have a text element for the title, and the other surround elements are the north arrow and scale bar. And we need to know their names, you know. One is that scale line, and that's just north arrow. So we need to know the names of them that we've set in the general properties of each of the map surround items. If you recall, you double click on them and you look at the name. So to do this type of a thing, we'll go through it here. We have to set up our basic map generally the way we would want it. So we want to make all of the neighborhoods white and no boundaries, no edges, no edges. So we'll go to our map here, and I'm just going to close the Python window for now. The first thing I'm going to do, I don't want to work on my good map, so I'm just going to save this as a different. So I'm going to go project here, save as, and I'll save it in the same folder, but I'll give it a different name. I'll call it q2a.aprx. So now there's things that I don't want on the map. So if we look at the example here, the only things on the map are the neighborhoods and the base map. We don't have any other layers that we need on here because the base map has all the things we need in it. So I'm going to remove all the layers that we don't need just to make everything easier. So I'll remove farm pathway, truck routes, police stations, everything but the neighborhoods. Delete on the keyboard. So now I just have neighborhoods and I want to make them white, but I don't want to see any boundaries on them. So I'll go over here, click on there, appearance. That'll bring me to the format polygon symbol. I'll go to properties and then outline color, the boundary color, no color, or white. Either one is fine. Like so, and then apply. So we have the neighborhoods the way we want them. So it's just white now. we have our north arrow, our scale bar, and our Ottawa map, with the anchor point you can see here on the left. And we'll move all of these around in code. So now I'll save that. Then I'll just close that layout and that map. Well, I'll open up the map and the layout anyway, just so we can see it. Because it's the layout we're interested in, because we're making a series of maps in this example. There we go. Just save it again. And then this is we'll run it in here, but keep in mind it'll be very slow running in here compared to running it in a standalone script, but this will give you an idea of how it works. So I'll go to analysis. And then I'm going to go in, instead of in, I'll go here. I'll just open up the Python window again, like so. And we'll copy and paste code into there. So we have set it up the way we want it. No boundaries, no edges, everything white for the neighborhoods. And remember, we want it to look like that. Not obviously like that, but we have to set up those colors beforehand. It just makes it easier. So to create a map that looks like the one we're emulating, like the one on the right here, we need to do the following. We need to set the neighborhood layer to a transparency of 30%. Then we need to get the text element that refers to the title of the map, loop over the neighborhoods with a search cursor, zooming to each neighborhood sequentially. Once we zoom to a neighborhood, we use a definition query to turn it off so we can see through the white to just the neighborhood details below in the base map. And then we can set the map title to the neighborhood name. We can move these things around to where we want them and then export it as a PDF. And we can do that within a with block going through each neighborhood sequentially. So let's look at how that works step by step. So this is kind of your first real script that you'll look at. Next, we have our workspace. So we put the full path to our workspace. That's where the data is. That's where the neighborhood layer is. Then we have a path to our APRX. We'll use current in the example I'll do right now. This little example script that I put together is made for obviously outside of ArcGIS Pro because it's faster to do these type of things without having ArcGIS Pro open. Then we set a path for where we're going to put our output maps, the layer that we're using for mapping neighborhoods, which is the neighborhoods layer, and then the field that contains the map titles, which is each neighborhood name. So we're just setting up a set of variables here of constants that we'll use later on. So going back to, we'll just do it step by step here in PyScripter. So I have my current already. And I'll just remove those things for now. So next I want to set up my workspace. So I need to also import env. So I say from ArcPy import env, like so. And then I can say env.workspace equals, and I'll go here back and I'll check out where my workspace is going to be. Let's see, temp in my case. And I'll go way down here. I'll go to names. Yeah, so I'm going way down to data 4. I should have done that by names. There we go. To clean that temp folder. It's going to be up here. There's data 4, where my data is, right here. And Q2, that's my APRX file. We're going to use current. So I'm interested in here, Ottawa GDB. So that'll be my path right there. So I'll just copy that like so. And I'll go back here to my PyScripter and I'll put that in, put some quotes around it, like so. and an R in front of it to say that's a string literal. So that's my workspace now. And then path to APRX. Path to APRX file will be equal to, in our case, current. And this makes it very easy to go back later once we know it's working the way we want to and run it by changing this to a path to an MXD or APRX file and then running it outside of ArcGIS Pro. So we have those two, the path to the APRX, the feature class will be neighborhoods. And the field of names, and I just want to make sure I use the same names as I had on the slide here. Outpath FC name field. So the name field equals names. Then the outpath. Let's say outpath equals C, and I'll put C temp, like so. So that just sets up our variables the way we need them for this to work. So we'll go to the next step now. So that's just setting stuff up, imports. Next, we need to first add field delimiters to the name field because it's going to be used in a definition query. Then we'll get our document, the project file reference, using the path to APRX, which is set at current right now. Next, we get the layout, just like we usually do. We only have one layout here in this map, so it makes it very easy. We get the map frame. So this is not new here. This is just what we've been doing so far. We get the map frame. Then from the map frame, we get the current map. And we add in a base map, OpenStreetMap. Once we add that, we can list the layers. And we get the first layer. Since we made our map, our layout ready with just one layer only, we get the first layer, which is automatically neighborhoods. So we're asking for just neighborhoods here. It's a list, so I get the first list component, which will be the layer object itself. Then we set the visibility and transparency of that layer to 30%. So back here in PyScripter, so I'll start with getting the field delimiters for the field. So I'll say fname for the field name equals ArcPy.add field delimiters, feature class, neighborhoods, obviously, and the name field. So next, I'll get a reference to the current project using the current keyword stored in the path to APRX variable. So I'll say curdoc, like we've been saying, document, current document, ArcGIS project, path to APRX, right there. Then I'll get the only layout that we have. I'll call it my layout again. All the stuff we've been doing so far. And that'll be curdoc.list layouts 0. Right there, since we only have one layout. Map frame, I'll list the elements on the layout of map frame element. So I'll say map frame to get that equals my layout dot list elements. And I'm interested in the map frame element, and that's all capitalized. And I just want the first one there since we only have one map frame. So MF now has a map frame in it, and I can get my map from that. I'll chain off the caps there. My map equals MF map frame dot map. Now I could add a base map in before listing the layers. So I'll say next up here, I'll say my map dot add base map. Just base map like that. And I'm going to use OpenStreetMap. Street map like that. That's how it's spelled in the base maps things. Then I'll get the first layer, again, the neighborhoods layer. So I'll say my layer equals my map dot list layers feature class neighborhoods, and that's a list. So I get the first item in the list to get the actual map layer. Then I can set the visibility of my layer. My layer dot visibility equals true. And the transparency, my layer transparency equals 30 for 30%. So we've gone through that now. Next, we want to move around any of the map surround elements that we want to move around. So first, we'll get the title. I think I changed it to title text, so I'll change that to title text. Title text. When I do this, I'll get the text element, which is going to be the one for the name of the map, which is the neighborhood name. And I'll put it at 1.2 inches in from the left. Then I'll get the scale bar, map surround element called scale line. That's the name of that one, the scale bar. It's just called scale line because it's a line scale bar. And I'll get the only element in that list, which is the only scale bar. And I'll put it at 0.5 inches in, 0.5 inches in at the bottom left corner. Next, so that was the scale line. After that, I'll then get the north arrow and move it. I want it in the upper right in this example here. So 10 inches X, so 10 inches on that 8.5 by 11 page, which I'm using. So 10 inches X to the right and 7.8 inches up on that 8-inch page. So it's in the upper right corner. So this is listing all the different elements and moving them by code. Of course, that's easy. I'm showing you this way rather than just doing it on the map, because often you might have multiple maps that you're going through in your code and you want to standardize the locations of the surround elements, for example. And this is how you would do that. So going back to our PyScripter here, I have the transparency. Now I'll do the element equals my layout list elements again. And here we're interested in the surround element. So map surround element. I'm looking particularly here for the one called scale line. So I say scale line like that. And I just want the element itself, not the list, since there's only one thing like that. So I put a 0 there. Now I can change its position, title text dot position X, element, I should say element position X equals 1.2. Next, I'll get the scale. Well, that's a scale line I got there. Actually, I want that to be, that's the element position at 0.5 and title dot text. This is just gonna be title text actually. Map surround element title text. Like so. Makes more sense now. And then I wanted that to be at 1.2. Next, I will get the scale line. So I'll say scale bar equals, again, all the same thing here. So I'm just going to copy that instead of typing it out. And I just change what I'm looking for here to from title text to the name of it, which is scale line, like so. And then I can move that scale bar dot element position x equals 0.5 and scale bar dot element position y equals 0.5. So the lower left corner of the page in inches, because this is what the page is in. And then finally, I'll get the north arrow and move it to the upper right. So I'll say north arrow equals, again, all the same things, but I'll say here north arrow, that's what it's called. Like so. Then I'll move it around. North arrow equals, or north arrow dot element position x equals 10 and north arrow dot element L-E-M-E-N-T position y equals 7.8, like so. So at this point, I've written a lot in here. So I think it's a good idea just to run what we have so far and see that it works. So I'll copy that and I'll go over to ArcGIS Pro and I'll have a look here. So what I'm looking for, basically, the only thing that's going to happen here is the neighborhoods will become somewhat transparent and the base map will be added, etc. So I'll just say like so. And I had I have an error here. Line 13 has no list elements. List elements. I didn't put an E in there, E-L-E-M-E-N-T-S. So I have to go back and change that. So here, list right there, elements. So I'll just copy that again. And this is why it's good to do it with the current keyword to start with, because you can figure out those things interactively. Oh, and it says index out of range, line 19. So what's that line? Let's look over here. So the line numbers should be right here. Element position, this is out of maps around title text. Let's just check the name of that to make sure to go in the right place. So the name of that is general title text. That's good. Just checking the names again. That's north arrow. It has to be spelled exactly the same. And this is scale line. That's all good. So let's look at the error in more detail. List index out of range. So that's in line right here. List index, so title text. Oh, because that's not a map surround element, it's a text element. So text element is a separate from a map surround element, and when you're looking for it. So we find that through debugging like this. Control copy, go back and paste. Yeah, and it's all done. So notice how everything has been moved around. So we have a base map layer that's in there. We have a semi-transparent neighborhoods layer. And I probably want to turn off the what do you call them? Labels, sorry. I'll want to turn off those labels. So I'll find that layer Do I have that? Did I get that layer yet by name? Not yet. So I'll have to list layers by name. So I'll just do this. I could turn it off manually, obviously. I can just right click on neighborhoods here and turn that off. That should be off for the setup of the map. There we go. I could have done it programmatically, but we'll just do it quickly in that case. Okay, so everything works good now with my script so far. It's moved the things to the right locations, but I think the Ottawa map should be a little bit more over because I want the title to be a little bit more over to the left. So I'm going to put it maybe at 0.5 as well. So instead of 1.2 for text element, I'll put it at 0.5, like so. And I can just copy and rerun that whole thing. But I think that title now is in a better position. It was too much to the right. In the final step, we start by looping over each of the neighborhoods. Before looping over each of the neighborhoods, I have a counter up here. And that counter starts at 1 because we're using the set selection set. And I want to start at the first feature, which means I made a mistake earlier when I told you that when we use selection set, that 0 is the first feature. In fact, 1 is the first feature. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to the 5th element. So we start at base 0 counting for that. So in the cursor, then I have the name field because I'm going to use that name. And the counter then just gives me the ability to set the selection set for each of the different neighborhoods. So I start in iterating over each poly in the cursor or each record or row in the, I just call it poly here. Probably not the best name because it's a row. So for row in cursor, then we create a selection set using the counter for the ID. So the first one in the first iteration of the loop, and the selection set is new. And then we zoom to that neighborhood. Then we remove the selection like so. By setting the selection set to a list with 0, since there is no 0, it removes the selection. So that's another way to remove the selection set. I just did it that way instead of clear selection, which is fine. Either way works. So I set it back to 0, so it's not selected anymore because we don't want a blue outline around our neighborhood. Then we check the definition query. If it supports a definition query, we set the definition query as squiggly brace not equal to squiggly brace. And the name field goes in the first squiggly brace here. So for example, names not equal to, and then poly 0, which is the first item in the row, which will be the name of that particular neighborhood. And that goes in the second squiggly brace right there in single quotes to make it a proper query. And remember, name field is already delimited earlier. So that removes then the polygon of interest from our view. Next, we say set the title text to poly 0. Again, poly 0 just being the name of the neighborhood. Once that's done, we just export to a PDF file, like so, as we've already seen how to do that. So PDF file is squigglybrace.pdf, and the format is outpath, which we set at the beginning, and then the name of the neighborhood.pdf. And that's exported to the PDF file with the outpath, which is C, I think C data 4 that we set. Then a message just saying process this map, and then incrementing the counter by 1. And I could have used the shorter form plus equals 1, but I'm just using the explicit one here because it's easier to read. Going back to our script, so we start by setting a counter equal to 1. Then we open up our search cursor. So I say with ArcPy.da.search cursor feature class, And then we want to put in the field name. We called it up here name field. After delimitation, F name. Here, name field. So that'll be the search cursor as cursor. And I'll say for row in cursor. Next, the first thing I do is I'm going to set the selection set to the first ID, which is held in counter. So I'll say my layer dot set selection set. Here, I'll put in it has to be in a list. So I'll say counter, and the method will be new. Next, I'm going to zoom to that particular object. So I'll say my layer, or I should say not my layer, but the map frame that we have from above equals, or mapfairy dot zoom to all layers. Like so. So that's from our map frame up here. Remember, it's a map frame method. So we zoom to all layers, then we remove the selection. So I'll just say my layer, again, I'll do the same as on the slide here, equals set selection, my layer dot set selection set, and I'll put 0 in there and new. So it removes the selection. Next, I'm going to set my definition query. And I won't use the support here. I'll just say my layer, since we're doing it interactively to start with, definition query equals, and then in quotes, squiggly brace, not equal to, single quote, squiggly brace, single quote, dot format. And here again, because this is a query, what we want to use our delimited one up here, which is F name for the field name. So field name will go in the first squiggly brace. I'll say F name, and then here will be row 0, which is the name of the neighborhood. So that turns off the neighborhood. Then I'll set the title text. Title text dot text equals the same thing, row, and then slice it to the first element. So for row and cursor. Finally, I'll export that. So I'll say PDF file equals, and then I'll use my squiggly braces here, squiggly brace dot PDF, and then dot format. And then in here, we'll go the out path that we specified earlier and the poly 0, the name of the neighborhood. Not poly, but row. I called it poly in the slides. I called it row here. Once we do that, we can export it. So I'll say my layout dot export to PDF, like so, and that will be PDF file. Then I'll just print a message. Print, and I'll put squiggly brace processed. I'll just say processed. Squiggly brace dot format, row 0, the neighborhood name, and then increment the counter by 1. It's like so. So now I can try that. So I'll take the whole thing here just to test this out, make sure it all works, and copy that and bring it back over here into ArcGIS Pro, paste it, and let's see what happens. So I'm just moving that over so I can watch what's happening. And the YH are just a couple print statements I put in there to see if everything was getting where it should be. It says processed Barhaven. Let's go have a look at that. Barhaven should be in here. So I'll just refresh that folder. Thought it was going there anyway. Maybe it hasn't saved it yet. Let's have a look at where am I saying? Oh, C temp. So I have to go to the temp file. C, just temp, plain temp. There I can see the results. I'll just say date modified here. There's Barrhaven. Let's have a look at it, see how it looks. It's just kind of slow to draw here, all of the layers. Let's look at a different one, Beaverbrook. There we go. And that's kind of what we wanted it to look like, right? So we can see through to the neighborhood at the back, and the white area up here. These are just other neighborhoods on the other around it. We're only interested in showing the neighborhood, and this really highlights the neighborhood and the features within it by making everything else kind of grayed out. So it's working just great. And then we'll go back, but it's going fairly slow. So far it's been, a few seconds or so, and it's only done a couple of those. It may have even, and there it goes now, another one. So we can check another one here. We'll just wait for it to draw everything. But generally it's working. So what I'll do, I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to hit my escape button. Or Control C. Try and stop that. There we go, keyboard interrupt. And it's just showing the last thing it was drawing there, which is fine. It's just not drawing it in real time for us because it's operating too fast to do that. So that's Carlton Heights Rideau view. So you can see how it didn't get too far like that, but we'll do it now. I'm going to close ArcGIS Pro altogether, and we'll run that script. I don't need to save anything, it's already saved here, just so they're not causing any overwrite issues. Now that we know that it works well within ArcGIS Pro, I'll just go back here, and in the script, I'll change current right to the path where the APRX file is instead. And that's all I need to change to make it work. So I'll go over here. Where's my APRX file? It's right there, Q2A APRX. So I'll copy the path, and I'll put in quotes here with a R and then in quotes. This is the string literal. And then Q2A.APRX like that. Now I'll run it, and it should go much quicker. You'll see that once it's kind of ramps up here, it'll process them a little bit quicker. So processed Barrhaven. And I put those print statements in there just to see if it was getting there. So print Y and H every time. So I'll go back over to temp here, C temp. And I'll just do date modified. There we got Barrhaven. Let's check out Barrhaven to start with. Perfect. That's what we want to see. Maybe I would want to change the text size a little bit, the text to a larger size. So text size like so. There. Now I'll try to redo it again. So it's processed Barrhaven. So that's finished. I'll go check out that one, see if the text size has changed. And I see that it has. So Barrhaven is larger now than it was before. Maybe it should be even a bit bigger than that. Maybe 20 points. But you can play around with that. So that's the Barrhaven map. I'll just get rid of these print statements. And then I'll try it again. Oh, it's already deleted. That's good. So I'll go ahead with that. Sometimes it just crashes for no reason, and you just have to kind of play around with things and see what happens. But the main thing is we know it works now, and debugging it or figuring out why it's crashing exactly. We'll try it again here, see how far, if it keeps going. But you can see it goes much faster this way than it does when you do it inside of ArcGIS Pro, because there's no need here for the video memory to be used to show you things on the screen. So it goes quicker naturally. And there it goes. It seems to be going fine now. And I could check out any one of those. There's Beaverbrook again. And so it's a quick way to make a number of maps. And it seems when I start opening them, it seems to crash. Maybe there's a memory address issue or something. I'm not sure. So I should stop opening them. And so that's the a good example here. And you'll be using this particular example and modifying it within the exercise for this week.